Hello, my friends. Welcome to Marvel Mayhem, the series where I watch every single Marvel movie, every single Marvel television production, and give you a review because Marvel has had a very long and interesting company as a producer of culture, let's say. And today we're going to talk about the 1990 forgotten classic question mark Captain America. So this generally has negative reviews, but I think it's connected to the situation of its production and the fact that the costume has rubber ears. It does, but you can't really tell unless you're really, really focused on that. So, what happened, and I might be missing out on a few key details, but Canon Films, and they produced some classics in the 80s, but they also produced a lot of bad stuff in the 80s. I think they eventually acquired the rights to Superman, and a lot of those later Superman sequels from the 80s, like Superman 4 or 3, are Canon Film Productions. So very, very bad. So they had acquired the rights to the Captain America story. They had a script. People didn't like it, and then Canon Films fell apart. I think two brothers maybe founded it, and they split. And the one brother, he received the rights to Captain America, and a company called 21st Century Films, not 20th Century Films. So that was kind of odd naming convention. But then they tried to make the movie, and they had a lot of really big name actors who might be involved with the production. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger was up for the role of Captain America, which would have been really, really funny. Like, one, because his body type is, I know Captain America has super powers, but you never think about him as being like really, really buff or muscular. So you have Captain America, so Arnold Schwarzenegger, Dolph Lundgren, and he couldn't do the movie because he was currently doing The Punisher. And so Schwarzenegger is from Austria, but Lundgren is from Sweden. And so Lundgren's accent is less noticeable than Arnold's, but it's still there. So having Captain America with an accent would be really, really weird. Also, Val Kilmer was up for the role of Captain America, but he decided to do the movie The Doors instead, which was one of my obsessions as a child. As a teenager, I watched that movie so many times. So I can't really think of any other actor in that role, but I think that of all of those people that I mentioned, I think Val Kilmer would have been the best. But if he had chosen to do this movie, then he probably wouldn't have been Batman later, because that would be odd, Captain America and Batman. Yeah, so that was the kind of the reason that it was so chaotic, and so it didn't really find an audience, right? But I think you'll see that the movie itself is very ambitious and is not as bad as people remember it being. So anyway, on to my review. The basic plot is the basic plot of Captain America. So, frozen in ice for decades, Captain America is freed to battle against arch-criminal the Red Skull. And it stars Matt Salinger as Steve Rogers and Captain America, and Scott Palin as the Red Skull and the Army Doctor. So the film begins in Italy in 1936, where some soldiers raid a house, kill a boy's family, and kidnap him for his intelligence. This boy becomes the Red Skull after being subjected to an experimental process. there's lots of things that don't really make sense about this aspect of the movie because I don't think that fascist Italy was necessarily great, but I also don't think that they were like Nazi Germany. So it's kind of like it's trying to like say that fascist Italy is exactly like Nazi Germany, which I think is incorrect. And there's lots of exposition about Red Skull. Like we have about 10 minutes of exposition about the character of Red Skull in a Captain America movie. So that doesn't really make sense. And there's this one aspect where it's necessary for the plot, but I'm not sure technologically it was possible. So the boy is he's in his home and he's playing piano, and he's playing piano for a bunch of his relatives, and then the soldiers burst in, as I mentioned, and they kidnap him, and his recording is being played, and it's being recorded. So his playing is being recorded on a proto tape recorder, and they leave, and the recording is still playing because they don't turn it off, which makes me wonder if there really was tape recorders in the 1930s in Italy. Very, very strange. So then we shift to the 1940s, and finally we are focused on Steve Rogers. So Steve Rogers is a guy who has like a lot of aw shucks energy, and I think the actor Matt Salinger actually is kind of perfect for Steve Rogers. He has this kind of like aw shucks charisma. He feels like he's from a small town, but he has a limp, and it seems like generally this movie is the first movie that takes the character of Captain America seriously, and it's a little bit different even from the MCU portrayal as far as I remember, because in the MCU portrayal Steve Rogers is just weak. That's his main problem. But actually, the reason why Steve Rogers would agree to this experimental procedure is because he has a limp because of polio, like with Roosevelt. So he wants to contribute to the fight against the Nazis, but he can't because he is physically disabled. And they show him limping around. And another thing which, I mean, it seems like a small detail, but I think it's important, is they do a lot of work establishing the details in the set design that make the 1940s section look really, really realistic. And with set design, you can go either usually two ways. One, everything is like really, really new and it looks off because it doesn't feel lived in. And the other way that you can tend to go is that you can find a place that is sort of preserved, and then, so this was filmed in the early 90s. It came out in the early 90s, so the appropriate time period is about 40 years, or yeah, about 30, 50 years before. So an actual living room that would look that way would look way too lived in. So they did a good job of balancing the actual aesthetic. And it kind of shows that the thing that kind of makes this movie not as successful as it could be is that it's not a character study. It's not a character study of Steve Rogers or even of Red Skull. It's a time period study. So they're introducing these different time periods, and the moviegoers are supposed to make some kind of conclusions about, contemporary America, about 50s America, about 40s America, and about 30s Italy. But I think most movies don't do that, and that's why this movie ultimately isn't as successful as it could be. All right, so back to the plot. of the movie, Steve then undergoes a super soldier experiment similar to the Red Skulls. And and I forgot to mention this, there's this moment. So the Red Skull's procedure makes him a hideous, hideous monster. And Steve's procedure is a little bit different. And the scientist who is in charge of this whole program, she says something nice to him, which is basically like, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. This is not fascist Italy. This is America. You don't have to do it. So he agrees because he's a hero, and he undergoes this transformation. And then we have a really, really odd twist. So the pacing in this movie is really, really odd because basically they say that Steve is okay, and instead of going and checking on Steve, the scientist, her name is Dr. Facelli, she gets introduced to this guy who basically says, "Oh, congratulations, Doctor, Heil Hitler," and then tries to assassinate her. And then there's like a fight scene with Steve because immediately he's stronger without any need for training. Although later he's in the hospital, so it seems like there is some need for training. And then he gets sent on his first mission, and there is about like a 10-minute scene of exposition about how the doctor died and how there'll be no more super soldiers and how there's not going to be any shield or any suit because the doctor died and she didn't keep any notes. Although she did keep some notes later in the movie, but maybe we'll get back to that. So Captain America then faces Red Skull, who behaves in an over-the-top manner with inconsistent accents and dialogue. A missile attack plot leads to Captain America deflecting a rocket aimed at the White House and sending it off course before ending up frozen. Captain America ends up frozen in Alaska. So I also don't understand how that works. So basically, there's a missile being shot at Washington at exactly the White House, and it's not even like a nuclear missile, it's just like a regular missile with explosive devices. And so Captain America is literally on the missile and he deflects it, but that seems like a really big deflection landing in Alaska, but he lands in Alaska and he's frozen for the next 50 years. And as he deflects it, a little boy is watching, and the little boy is going to grow up to be the president of the United States. So then we have the next time jump. So the time jump is to the 1950s, where the little boy is talking about the fact that he saw this happen. He saw a man on the rocket, and nobody believes him. But this man inspires him to become the president. So then it jumps to the 1990s and the boy is the president. And these time jumps are really, really abrupt and they don't feel earned. And as I said, I think the movie is going for kind of like a time period study rather than a character study, but it does feel really, really jarring. So in the present timeline, Red Skull has changed his appearance and his name. Because obviously if you have a Red Skull face, that's a pretty identifying feature. So he's involved in a conspiracy with industrial elites to control the president using mind control. And Captain America, he's revived from the ice, but he shows very little confusion about what's going on. Although there is a great moment where he's been rescued by the president's buddy, and the president's buddy's like, "Hey, you're Captain America. Tell me all you know about Red Skull." And then Steve's looking around and he sees a tape recorder that says "Made in Japan," and he sees that the car is a Volkswagen, and he's like, "Oh, this is a spy because he's using foreign technology." But it doesn't really make any sense. that you would be in Alaska. Or I guess he doesn't really know where he is, so maybe it makes sense that he would be freaking out by being driven in a Volkswagen. Actually, that kind of makes sense. So it's a good moment. But there's not, because the movie has jumped around so much and spent so much time on other things, there's not really a lot of time for Steve to feel out of place in modern America, which I think should be a really important part of his story, because the story of Captain America, at least as it's told nowadays, I think is like how the ideals of America are ones that are timeless. And even though Steve doesn't understand the modern world entirely, he's still going to fight to protect it because, as I said, these ideals are timeless. So the film introduces many characters quickly and often without proper development, which weakens the emotional impact of the film. Like, for example, Steve is getting married to, I guess the woman's name is Birdie, and there's a ridiculous scene where he jumps out of a parachute. It jumps out of a plane with a parachute and he says, "I love you, Birdie." But yeah, so she eventually has a daughter, and because Steve hasn't aged, the daughter is going to be more of a love interest than the elderly Birdie at this moment. But the daughter's character, there's no development. She's just introduced, and then automatically they need to have some kind of like love connection. But there is a really, really great scene with Steve and Birdie, because Birdie did wait for Steve when he disappeared in the 1940s, like for about 10 years, 15 years, but she couldn't wait anymore. And so finally she gets married to this good guy. And then Steve is like, you can see it on his face. Like, on the one hand, he's really touched that she waited. But on the other hand, he realizes that that was a horrible, not a horrible decision, but it was really heartbreaking, because think about how much happiness she could have had if she didn't wait for him for so long, because he was literally frozen in ice. So then the story continues, and there's lots of inconsistencies. Like, there's a lack of security around the president of the United States because he's able to be kidnapped very, very quickly. The tone fluctuates between very serious, like the scene that I mentioned, and unintentionally comedic, like with the ears. I understand why they did that, because the original costume, the ears were open, and it was chafing the actor, so they made a costume with fake ears. But why? Why not just cover the ears entirely then? Overall, the film has decent performances, especially of Red Skull, because he's very over the top. There is a strong set design, and it has a better understanding of Captain America than earlier adaptations, because there was a serial series in the 1940s about Captain America that was, shown in movie theaters, but basically they just took the character and used a different story. Like, Captain America in that one doesn't have a shield and he has a gun. So what's the point of having superpowers if you have a gun? And then in the 70s, there was an attempt to put him on television, and they made two made-for-TV movies starring Captain America. But in that one, he's the son of Captain America, so technically he's not the Captain America. But however, it suffers from poor pacing, awkward dialogue, inconsistent storytelling, and underdeveloped characters. So not great, but better than earlier versions of the character. I'd give it around a B minus, because I think it does have problems, but I think if it had better marketing, it could have been a movie like The Rocketeer or even Batman 1989 that people like look on much more fondly than they do now, because I'm sure those films also have problems, and those films are probably better from a technical point of view, but it's an enjoyable film, as I said, B minus. So, all right, what do you think about Captain America 1990? If you've watched it, leave your thoughts in the comment section. If you like what I do, please subscribe to the channel and please leave a like on this video. Thank you. Bye-bye.